to the 100 Club. You are back with us. This is the leading fan forum for the 100, which is cricket's newest format. The 100, which is coming to English cricket grounds across the country from 21st of July. Not just English cricket grounds, of course. I'm forgetting my beloved Sophia Gardens in Cardiff. I am Tom. I am the proprietor tonight, but joined ably and indeed propped up most of the night by Rich.
Hello.
Ollie.
Hello.
They're going to be guiding us through some quite complicated business tonight. So if you remember the last episode, we had a look at what the tournament is, where it's come from, some of the pros and cons even. We're going to have a look today at what the teams comprise of in terms of players and how that's come to be and through the process generally known as the draft. If you're enjoying our content so far, please do let us know about it. We really want to hear from you. Please do stick us a like and a comment, and even better, a subscribe to whichever platform you're using, and we'd really appreciate that. Without further ado though, let's cut to the chase. These are 8 teams ready to play some cricket, but they do not look like any team I've recognised from cricket in the past. They're not a county team, so where have they come from? Ollie, help me out.
So, as you say, we've got 8 new teams. They're jam-packed with household names, so there's lots of cricketers in there that we're very familiar with. But the process for putting together the 8 new teams is, particularly on the men's side, is far from straightforward. So, sit down, everyone. This might take some time. There's a few interesting nuances in there which take a little bit of explaining. So I'm going to try my best to kind of make sense of the way that these teams have been put together. But I guess by a little bit of a tease, these teams have all been affected in some way by COVID, but also quite bizarrely by Brexit. So if you feel as if you sort of missed out on Brexit news because everything's been overtaken by COVID, here's your chance for it to come roaring back into your cricket life, because I'll explain just how Brexit has kind of left its footprint on the 100.
It's been too long since I've had a chance to talk about trade negotiations with my friends.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're going to explain it to us, Ollie, because I'd like to think of myself as a reasonably intelligent chap. I've managed to get a PhD at some point in my life, but the rules of the 100 draft were pretty tough. Even
I think I'll be, if you to be honest, if everybody manages to watch the whole video and can answer in the comments how this works, then we can probably issue a degree certificate from the 100 Club.
Sure. Are you essentially doing the classic teacher line? There will be a test.
Yeah. Pay attention.
I think there will be a reward, and it will make some 100 certificates to send out. I've graduated from the school of the draft.
When I've got myself together, I might be actually getting some kit together. So we probably will be doing some giveaways.
Yeah.
So yeah, pay attention. Pin your ears back.
Yeah.
You at the back. I'm watching you.
Let's talk a little bit about the women's teams first, because the process by which they were put together is considerably simpler than men's. So let's deal with it first before we get into the intricacies of the men's draft. But from the women's side, basically back in 2019, the first stage of the process was that all of the 8 franchises could select from the pool of centrally contracted English players 2 players, and that was the first sort of cornerstones of their squads. Now, centrally contracted players are the players who are sort of paid by the ECB. There's 17 of those at the moment. But think of them basically as the sort of the star professional players within the English game, and kind of if you think of them in those terms, you kind of won't go too far wrong. So that was the initial pick, each side picking 2, and then there was a 6-month window between October and May in which they could basically put together the rest of their squad, and they could recruit domestically. So. Players from across the English game, but also international players. And the constraint was that they were allowed a maximum of 3 international players in their squad. And they were also only allowed 3 centrally contracted players. So they made their initial pick in the first stage of 2, and they could have 1 additional one in the latter stage of the process. And there wasn't a draft, there wasn't an auction. But this process did put together some very talented squads, not just of the centrally contracted English players, but also attracted some of the big talented names from across the world of women's cricket. So, likes of Meg Lanny, Deandra Dottin, they all signed up to play in the 100, and there were some very talented looking squads. Because of COVID, the 2020 edition was delayed, and so in September, all the players had the option to roll over their contract. So this is where the women's process was a little different from the men's process we'd like to talk about, because the emphasis was on the players to decide if they wanted to maintain their contracts.
Okay, so let me catch up here. So we're in September 2020 now. You've had the process all the way from 19 through 2020. COVID has happened. You've got a squad that they've lovingly created,
Yeah.
crafted, and put all that effort into, and then actually the players have a say, which you can understand. But they've got to do a bit of rebuilding, right?
Yeah. So at that point, some players' schedules have changed. There's a lot of cricket being played around the world, so availability has changed. All sorts of personal circumstances, because of COVID, I think will probably, come into people's individual decisions. But as a result, there was basically another selection process, and that ran from October of 2020 through to the 21st of May this year, when the teams have been recruiting players, and they had up until May to have put 13 of their 15 members together. Now, I think things have changed a little bit because of the COVID travel restrictions. Certain players had been penciled in and announced, and are now unfortunately having to kind of drop out. So there's going to be a few changes to some of these squads. But if we want to have a look at the squads as they currently stand, I think we've got some graphics, and as you can see, most teams have now got kind of the core of those squads together. They've got sort of two or three, most cases, sort of two of their international overseas players lined up, and so there's a few spaces down at the bottom where they're going to be adding kind of last minute talent, either kind of players that are performing well domestically, that perhaps been overlooked in some of the early rounds. Or it's just, I would expect we're going to sort of fill those spaces, and hopefully we'll get some more overseas stars that are confirmed as attending as well. Rich, I think you've been sort of scouring the internet looking for rumours about who some of those overseas players might be.
Yeah, so like you said, as one door closes, another one opens, and some international stars might not be able to make it over due to various quarantining rules or prior commitments. But the Indian women team will be in England touring before the 100 starts, and there's rumours that quite a few of that squad might be entering the tournament as last-minute replacements. So I think it's already confirmed that Jemima Rodriguez will be playing for the Superchargers, but you also might have Harmanpreet Kaur, Dipti Sharma, and even Shimali Verma might be the 17-year-old Wunderkid might be joining the tournament as well. So that could be quite exciting. I think I was just going to say as well, in terms of the women's draft, and we'll go on to discuss the men's a bit later, there's much more of a regional imprint on the women's teams. And I think that makes sense when you realise the rationale behind it, because a lot of the players involved in the women's will be, either amateur or semi-professional, not necessarily used to sort of spending long periods away. Quite a lot of the players are very young as well, quite a few teenagers in the various squads. So they didn't necessarily just want to sort of pack these young players up to the other end of the country for a couple of months. So they've kept them closer to the counties that they play for. And as an upshot of that, there's tends to be quite a strong regional bent to the women's tournament.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning that I think the view of the ECB is that some of these team structures will probably have sort of a life beyond just the 100 tournament itself. So I think that some of the regional sort of centres of excellence will start to sort of be clustered around some of these clubs going forward. And so, as you say, it makes sense to sort of make sure that the teams are sort of more geographically grounded than some of the guns to hire that are perhaps we're going to see in a moment in terms of the men's game.
And I think it's really important as well for the Sorry, Tom.
Well, no, I was just going to say, so, I mean, every one of these teams has got spaces to fill. Every one of these teams has got at least one overseas space still available to them. And I think, unless I'm wrong, most of them have also got a centrally contracted space available to them. So there's still plenty to play for, given we are less than 50 days out, as you say. I suppose my only other comment, as I look at it there, would be there's no difference beyond the top two lines, which are the centrally contracted. Everyone else there is just the order that they've been selected, or an order that they've come to.
I think if you look closely, they're in alphabetical order.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Right.
So there is an order, but it's not a cricketing one.
But we've not got things like pay tiers or rounds or anything like that.
No. This is a nice sort of clean picking teams. Who do you want to play in your side? Who would like to play in your side version of assembling a squad? If you want to see a different way of putting together a cricket team, you've come to the right place, because let's talk a little bit about the men's process.
Just before we do, let's just make the comment that a lot of names on that list, and we will be going through that in detail as we run up to the tournament on a week-by-week basis.
Yeah, and notwithstanding, some are going to change, probably.
Yes.
Make us look stupid. Go on, do it, ECB.
Yeah, don't try and read every name on that list. What we'll be doing as part of these shows is going through each franchise in turn, and we'll look at the player lists and talk about each of the players that we think could really influence this tournament. So don't worry about trying to grab them off that slide. The men's process was a draft. Now, draft has been around, and fans of American sports, I think, will be familiar with the concept of the draft. The Indian Premier League has its auction process, but the draft, I think, is pretty new for an English professional sport. It's probably more akin to just picking teams in the playground. But this one also involves price brackets, and that is actually important in terms of who ends up in which side, but also who gets a side at all, because there are some big name players that put themselves forward to the 100 and didn't get picked because of those price brackets. So we'll come on to that in a sec. It's worth saying with the men's squads that they are 16 players. So women's squad's 15, men's players are 16. There's 7 salary brackets, and teams are able to pick 2 players in each of those salary brackets. Now, if you do the maths, you'll see that there's a couple spare. Doesn't quite add up, does it? 7 times 2. So those 2 extra places, one is reserved for a wild card, and we don't yet know who those wild cards are going to be, because they'll be the form players that are picked out of the T20 Blast. So they'll be the last names to be penciled into any of the squads, and hopefully that means that there's some players that are actually in a bit of nick that get a run out. So it means that there's still something to play for all those county players that are playing in the Blast.
They're literally going to be pulling on their jumper as they're coming onto the pitch, kind of thing.
Yeah.
How last minute is last minute?
It depends if any of the franchises are suddenly short off a Friday night.
Yeah.
Phone around.
We've only got an extra large jumper for you. It's going to be flapping all over the place.
Yeah, you'll be able to spot who hasn't got a name on the back. It's just written on in pen. Frantically get a Sharpie out on the boundary. So that's going to be one of the last spots. But the other one was reserved for centrally contracted red ball England players. I mentioned it early on about centrally contracted players. So within the men's side of English cricket, there are players basically that play for the England teams, and they can either have a red ball contract, which means they're going to be playing Test cricket, or white ball cricket. So that means that they'll play T20 or ODI 50 over cricket, one day national cricket, so 50 over cricket. Now, the ECB, so the England Cricket Board, have decided that the players that they want to kind of ring fence are the red ball cricketers. So these are kind of the regulars in the Test team. So it's like Joe Root, Ben Stokes. So the idea is that each squad is going to have at least one of these centrally contracted red ball cricketers. And the way that they were selected was quite interesting as well, because what they did was they wanted to make sure that there was some kind of local affinity already with the way those red ball cricketers were allocated. So basically the franchises were allocated a catchment area in which existing counties were assigned to the new franchise. So, as an example, the Northern Superchargers, who are going to be playing the cricket at Headingley in Leeds, they had 2 counties that were their catchment area, so Durham and Yorkshire. So it meant that when they came to choose their red ball cricketer, they could make a choice between the Yorkshire pair, Joe Root and Johnny Bairstow, or Ben Stokes, who plays for Durham. And in that initial allocation of players, the Northern Superchargers went for the firepower of Ben Stokes. And what that meant was that the other franchise were free to try and pick up Johnny Bairstow and Joe Root. And that's what happened. So Joe Root, the England Test captain, is going to be playing his cricket in Nottingham for the Trent Rockets. And Johnny Bairstow has been picked up by the Welsh Fire. And that's what happened in the first round, I should say. Back in 2019. The Oval Invincibles also had a choice to make. They had to choose between the Surrey all-rounder Sam Curran and the opening batsman Rory Burns, and they went for Sam Curran, which meant that London Spirit picked up Rory Burns, and so in the initial allocation, that was the split. The other red ball picks were slightly more straightforward because there wasn't, there weren't 2 players with red ball contracts. Chris Wokes will be playing for the Birmingham Phoenix. Manchester Originals have signed up their adopted Lancastrian Joss Butler. Not sure how his Manc accent is coming along, but he's been playing his cricket up there for a while now. And the Southern Brave have got Joffa Archer, who plays his county cricket down at Hampshire. If you're a Nottinghamshire fan,
is he Sussex or
I
Hampshire?
think, yeah.
Sussex.
I thought he was Hampshire man.
Yeah,
Is he not?
Sussex.
Well, he's on the south coast, further south than I keep tabs on.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joff. Now, they both in this example actually of not having to play the catchment area, not necessarily being the county that is the home ground of the franchise. So Sussex and Hampshire, both part of the catchment area of the Southern Brave. So yeah, easy mistake to make. Well done, you've caught bonus points for spotting the area. Now, if you're a Nottinghamshire fan watching this and you're wondering where your local hero Stuart Broad is, both him and Jimmy Anderson, his fellow England postman, have decided that although they've been invited to take part in the competition, they're not going to play. They want to focus on their red ball cricket, and they've been given a very curious title of a non-playing player. So they're
like
involved.
A Ryder Cup captain.
Yeah, I don't know what the non-playing player does. I've
think
played with.
He pays half subs, I think.
Now I've played cricket with plenty of non-playing players who bat at 11 and stand at slip at both ends. But I don't think this is going to be Stuart's and Jimmy's approach to this.
It sounds like Donald Rumsfeld has been working for the ECB, giving some names.
Yeah, we've certainly got some known unknowns as to what they're going to be up to. Yeah. So that's the red ball cricketers allocated. Each of the franchise were then able to make 2 additional local icon picks, and this is ahead of the draft process. And again, it was from players that played from the counties within their catchment area. Again, trying to make sure that there's sort of a local connection and some affinity with the fans and the players that they already know from the county game. So, as an example, this meant that Birmingham Phoenix picked up a pair of players from Worcestershire. They got Moeen Ali and Pat Brown because both of them are playing their cricket at Worcestershire, and that was one of the catchment counties for the Birmingham Phoenix. Similarly, London Spirit signed up Owen Morgan and Dan Lawrence, and Manchester Originals signed up Matt Parkinson, who's a name that was probably not that familiar to many people back in 2019 when these names were first allocated, but he's sort of since broken into the T20 side. He's since picked up a couple of ODI caps. And they also got Saqib Mahmood, who's a name that's very familiar for me at the moment because he recently picked up a fifer in the Rosies game and helped to sink Yorkshire when he was playing for Lancashire in the county championship. So it's just worth noting that these players, when you made a local pick, meant that you were using up one of your price brackets. So Moeen Ali was valued at 125k, and that meant that by choosing him as a local icon, the Birmingham Phoenix had foregone one of their 125k picks when it came to the draft.
So So that was decided pre-tournament by the pricing bands of the players. Okay, so that was not a sort of a conversation that was had after they were picked.
No, so they'd been given some sort of nominal price value. They were kind of, I think, predicting where they would go if they were picked in the draft.
So did Birmingham have a choice, or did they have to pick up Moeen Ali and Pat Brown?
No, that was their choice.
Okay.
So they decided when they were managing their squad and thinking about what make of their side was going to be, they almost didn't want to put it to chance. They had the option to get, basically get 2 players that they knew they wanted in their squad and get them before they went up into the open market of the draft process. And there were a few, not everyone went kind of top bracket. So the London Spirit picked up Dan Lawrence in one of the 60k spots. So I think some of the clubs saw this as a chance to just sort of pencil in a few bargains that perhaps they thought that people had been slightly undervalued, and they knew that they were going to pick them, and they thought that other franchises would also be going for them at those kind of prices. So it's kind of like trying to take people out of the market in a way. But that meant that when the draft began, every team had already used up two of its price points, and then we move on to the draft. So lots were drawn to decide a pecking order. 570 cricketers are signed up and given themselves a reserve price. That was kind of a minimum price that they were prepared to be paid. And then on the 20th of October, the draft took place, and each team had 100 seconds to make each pick.
So let's just clarify that point because it's an interesting nuance to it. As a cricketer, I decide my own reserve price, right? So I go in saying this: I'll play in this tournament, but I'm not accepting anything less than 125k, which means you either pick me in the first round or I'm not part of it.
Yeah. Basically, it's a sort of what is your get out of bed price? And so there's a few big names.
Or your 10-day quarantine price.
Yeah. Yeah. So...
well, clearly we're not aware of this at this point. This is October 2019 still, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this was all pre-COVID when just jetting around the world was easy. Remember those times. But yeah, so Chris Gale, Lassie Malinga, Kaziga Rabada put themselves down as 125k and didn't get picked. Anyone want to guess who the first pick was? Top pick?
I will go for Dre Russell.
Close. It was 2.
Was he?
Rich, who would you pick?
Who would I pick first? I don't know. David Warner?
No, Rashid Khan.
Oh.
Yeah, Trent Rockets had first pick. Went for Rashid Khan.
Fair enough.
Sensible.
So this process continued until all the price brackets had been filled, and the only constraint at this point was that you could only have 3 overseas players in your squad. And looking back on it now, there are a few bargains down at the bottom end of the picks. So Dawid Malan went for the second lowest price bracket, 40k. And obviously since he's gone on to be ranked the number 1 Test T20 batsman in the world.
So he was in the open draft. He wasn't a local legend? Or
No,
like that?
He was in the open draft. Nobody picked him until they got down to 40k.
There isn't currently a South African franchise. The Cape Cobras.
Wow, that's good. Okay, that's a steal. Okay.
Yeah, it's a steal. So that gets us to 2020, and obviously along comes COVID, throws the whole event back a year, and it throws up a few logistical challenges. So a lot of players have had to reconsider whether they're going to be able to make it to this tournament, and it's also meant that the franchise have had another 18 months to think about whether they've actually made sensible picks along the way, and this is where it's a little bit different from the women's process, where the emphasis this time was much more on the franchise to decide who it was they wanted to retain Some players will have made themselves unavailable, but on the most part, the franchise have had to think, who do they want to keep? But the reason I kind of explained in some detail about the central contracted players at the start is that since 2019, some players have won new central contracts and gained a contract by getting into the test team, but other players have also lost their central contracts. And the ECB put together a process to deal with this and make sure that the most recent test players were still involved. So rather than explain the rules, I think I'll just try and explain who ended up where.
Okay.
So hold on tight. Ollie Pope gained a central contract, and because of that, because he'd already been drafted to the Southern Brave, they had to choose between him and their other centrally contracted player, Jofra Archer. They chose Jofra, which meant that Ollie Pope was released back into the pool of England Red Bull players that could be picked by other teams. And he was eventually signed up by the Welsh Fire. Everyone follow that so far?
Okay. Who had a spot, presumably, because Johnny Bairstow lost his central contract.
Quite right. He did have a Red Bull contract, but he lost it. And Welsh Fire did have the option to retain him, and they sort of exercised that option. Now, interesting, he's listed on the website as an all-rounder. So I don't know whether his part of his negotiations was that he was planning to bowl a few overs.
I've not seen Johnny Bairstow bowl much. I'm going to be honest.
Neither have I. So either that's a mistake on the ECB's website, or Johnny's been practicing his bowling has had a good COVID for bowling. perhaps if you've seen Johnny Bairstow bowl, you can leave us some comments below and possibly a link to YouTube where we can watch Johnny Bairstow bowl. If you can give him a review, that would be great. I'm not convinced he's done an awful lot of bowling, but maybe someone out there can tell us how he.
There'll be some shaky mobile phone footage somewhere.
Yeah, let's see it. So then we come on to Rory Burns. So Rory Burns has still got a Red Bull contract, but he has also switched franchise, and this is all about the status of Zach Crawley. So London Spirit had picked Zach Crawley in the 2019 draft, and then he got a central contract because he got into the test side, and that left the London Spirit with a choice to make: were they going to keep him, or were they going to keep Rory Burns? And they've obviously chosen to keep Crawley because he's staying, and Rory Burns has been released to the England pool and has been signed up by the Oval Invincibles. Okay. Any more questions about?
Well, I suppose the obvious question
spring to mind.
Well, I suppose the obvious question is why on earth they're just looking at the Red Bull players here rather than, for instance, Darid Milan, the white ball supremo. Why Red Bull being the differentiator?
Well, so. My assumption is there are certain players, Joe Root, I think in particular, that probably hasn't been seen playing that much domestic white ball cricket. I think most of the other players have probably been seen kind of by domestic audiences a little bit more. But you do raise a very good point, because the other name that has been given a central contract is Dom Sibley.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Now, if you've been watching Test cricket, you'll know that Dom Sibley is a grafter and an accumulator, and not the first name that would necessarily spring to mind when it comes to power hitting and short format cricket, which is kind of possibly why he wasn't drafted in the first place back in 2019. But because he's been given a central contract, he has ended up playing in the 100, and he is going to be at the Birmingham Phoenix. But because he wasn't drafted in 2019, they didn't have to give up Chris Wokes, because I think that would have been an interesting choice. Between
I don't think it's much of a choice.
Well, they'd have been, but they wouldn't necessarily have had a choice in the same way that Burns was released by the Spirit.
And I probably shouldn't be rude before Dom Sibley proves me proves us all wrong, perhaps, and becomes some legend of the 100.
Well, it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see if he can justify his spot.
Yeah.
So the other issue that's affected all of this is player availability. So some players like Steve Smith have had to rule themselves out, and kind of even barring quarantine rules, there's a number of international fixtures that are kind of going to overlap with bits of the 100 tournament. So it's one of the things that I guess some of the franchises have had to bear in mind is, do they want to pick players that are going to be available for the whole tournament, or do they want to pick players that are going to be at least available for some of it because they think just their presence in half a dozen games is going to be enough to justify the spot? So that's one of the factors they've had to think about. And obviously there's form, right? There's not been that much domestic cricket played, but there's been some. And I think some of the franchise have probably looked at the players they picked and possibly had second thoughts and thought they can maybe do better. Now
So
the final.
I'm looking at it on the screen there. Sorry, you go on first, and I'll come back to my point.
Yeah.
Go on.
So the final factor that has played into all of this is probably the one that I least expected to be talking about in the context of the 100 and the context of cricket, and it's Brexit. I think we all hoped we sort of heard enough of Brexit. Now, whichever way you voted, you probably didn't vote on whether you wanted coal-packed players or locally registered players to be playing in the 100. But changes to immigration status has meant that some players that were eligible to play in 2019 are not eligible to play in 2021. And it comes down to this rule of there being 3 overseas players as a maximum. So some players were allowed to play as a local player because of their status within the EU. So spare a thought for Dane Villas. The South African's been playing in Lancashire for a number of years, and he was the top pick at the Manchester Originals in the first draft. And he stood to make 125k. He was the top salary bracket, and he was classed as a domestic player despite being South African because of his rights to work within the EU. That meant he had to be treated like a local player. Post-Brexit, all those EU rules have changed, and so now he's an overseas player, and the Manchester Originals have decided that because he's classed as an overseas player, they're going to release him and try and find another alternative. So he's just lost 125k. I'm not sure that Boris Johnson is going to be on his Christmas card list.
Yeah, no. And, I mean, the end result of all of that is you can see it there, but there's some big holes being punched in the squads.
Yeah. Now
Manchester, yeah.
So Manchester Originals have decided to go for a complete overhaul. Right? They've only retained 4 of their original draft picks, and they've released 10 players, including all 3 of their over 3 stars, either because they weren't going to be available or because the status had changed. They want to think again. You kind of contrast that to a couple of other teams, London Spirit, Trent Rockets, Southern Brave. They only stood to make 2 changes to their squad. And so this was the basis of the second draft, which took place earlier this year. And so, as you can see, some teams making lots of picks, others just 1 or 2. And this was running in the reverse order of the draft from last time.
Okay. So we see now full squads all round. And if you're watching on screen, you can see it. But yeah, essentially, those gaps have been filled through another draft process, right?
Yeah. And I think the one thing that stood out from this was that the Southern Brave had picked David Warner in 2019 and released David Warner in 2020, and then picked David Warner. They had with their first pick, third pick of the second draft in 2021. And I think I know what was going on there. And I think they were secretly after Kieran Pollard. I think they were being a bit cheeky and thought there might be a chance to trade up one big hitter for another. And that they were going to try and hope that they could pick Pollard. But the Welsh Fire got in there first, picked Pollard with their pick, which then left the Southern Brave having to re-pick David Warner. Now, I don't know whether the players will be aware of this. I'm guessing they are, but if they don't and they're watching, they do now.
Yeah.
And I can't wait really to see the verbals between those two, because Pollard can certainly give a bit to Warner to say he was the player that the Southern Brave really wanted.
And if you want an indication for how long this process has taken, Manchester Originals round 2 pick Harry Gurney has retired.
Yeah, that's going to be that's another hole.
Yeah.
And I've got another one. So I'm looking there at Trent Rockets. They've appeared to have managed to find a 4th overseas player, right, in Tim van der Gugten, who I'm fairly sure is Australian, right?
So, you've asked another Brexit question there.
Oh.
Unlucky. You've fallen into the Haviland trap.
No, hang on. He's from Sydney.
He is now entitled to play here as a European, a settled European living in the UK under a European passport. So
let me guess. He's Greek. No, okay. Presumably some Dutch blood in him.
I think there must be a little bit of Dutch heritage in him.
Okay.
I don't know what's making me think that.
No,
But,
okay.
yeah, I think Tim van der Gugten has a Dutch passport, has been in the UK, and so now he gets to be a local in a way that poor old Dane Villas doesn't.
Okay.
So yeah, I told you Brexit was going to come into this, and there it is.
So let me try and recap for just for a bit of a benefit. So the women's selection, relatively simple, some centrally contacted players, then a free-for-all, essentially relatively normal, pick the squad as they come. A bit of readjustment after the COVID crisis allows, therefore, 15 players per franchise, off you go. Men's, centrally contract, local legends, insert Brexit, insert COVID, suddenly you've got squad holes all over the place, reinsert some negotiations, have another draft, and suddenly you've got these squads. But ultimately, what they've got is 16 players on each of the men's franchises, which have a combination of 3 overseas stars, a couple of local names of note, and some England players that should give them some balance across the board. Have I massively got that wrong?
No, that's a pretty good summary.
Okay.
And I think I've been looking at this and trying to think who I think had a good second draft. And I think
I was thinking Manchester Originals till I thought Harry Gurney retired. But you got to like Kagiso Rabada, and Nicholas Peran is very experienced. That's all good.
Yeah, I think we look at that side and it looks like a pretty good lineup now.
I think looking at the way teams have gone about it, one thing that's interesting for me is that most teams have tended to go overseas fairly heavily early. So look through sort of Spirit, Manchester, the Welsh Fire. Most teams are picking 2 or 3 overseas stars in rounds 1 and 2, whereas Birmingham and Oval have been more content to sort of load up on local talent. It's not till their 4th pick that Birmingham have gone for New Zealand captain Kane Williamson, who again isn't sort of the kind of classic player you think of in terms of T20 cricket. They've gone instead for Tom Abel, the Somerset player, Liam Livingston, big hitting Englishman, etc. So it'd be interesting to see how that works for them and whether they've got some bargains lower down in the draft in the likes of Shaheen Afridi or Adam Zampa. Yeah,
interesting stuff. Well, we're going to get into the teams from this point going forward. So I suppose I'm going to thank you, Ollie, for doing the unimaginably unpopular job of going through the draft. I think when we get to it, it should all become a lot clearer. Frankly, the important point is for the franchises and for the fans and us, the fans, we want to know who we're supporting and why. And I'll be watching that video, therefore, a few times on my own, just so I understand why on earth it is I'm cheering for the team in front of me. I suppose the last sort of bit of business now is to look forward, and we are going to go into some team previews, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I was thinking how we're going to do this, and given that some of the teams are still being built, we don't know quite what that looks like. But we are hoping to get some interviews, hoping to get some representatives of the game alongside. But we need to have a team to talk about for next week. So it is therefore my intention to bring out the most high-tech bit of kit you've ever seen, which I'm calling the Randominator. Okay. Bear with me.
Here we go.
Next time we will be talking about, brace yourselves, and if you are epileptic, may want to look away. And that's not just my shirt.
Here we go.
No expense spent. Oh, we're on the Southern Brave.
Oh.
Brave.
Okay, so I forget which crisp franchise that is, but we'll be...
No, it's not Pop Chips. It's Pom Bears.
Pom Bears.
Pom Bears.
Crisp knowledge.
I have a cupboard full of them.
The ever popular staple of children's parties, the Pom Bear Braves, and we'll be digging into them in some detail. So please do join us again. If you want to get a notification of when that's on, please subscribe, give us a like. It really helps us out, and you can turn on the notifications as well, and you'll hear in good time when we're going to be. I think it's mostly going to be Tuesdays and Thursdays on Rhythm now, all the way into the tournament. So thank you again for joining us, Ollie, Rich. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah.